Hello. Hello. So I want to apologize in advance to the translators. When I get excited, I talk really fast about science. So apologies in advance. You can watch it again. Thanks to Jane. Jane is awesome. And I think she spoke to a lot of the things that I'll talk to. So you guys all know Joey, so I don't have to spend any time on Media Lab, but I'm one of the groups inside of the Media Lab. And I think a lot about food. Clicker's not working. Click. Oh, there we go. This is my group. It's made up of geneticists, flavor chemists, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, computer scientists, algorithms experts, nutritionists, or the dietitians, architects, and so on. So we're a big collective group all working together from a lot of different disciplines. As Jane mentioned, if you say food crisis to somebody, it depends on what crisis you think is going on in food. Do you think that there's not enough food, that there's too much food, that algal blooms are creating toxic oceans, that GMO is a curse on the world, that GMO is the savior of the world, that land taken from farmers, small shareholder farmers is the problem? Or is it the fact that that land was taken from a rainforest prior to that? So the world of food is one big bad story for the last 20 years about everything that's wrong. The problem is, you can't focus in on anything to try to solve it, and it's so big you just wish someone more powerful than yourself would get involved. So I make food small in my work. How old do you think the average apple is in a grocery store in the United States? From the date it was picked till the date it got in your mouth. Any guesses? Just yell it out. 1 year, well, yeah, the negative, yeah, 6 months. Anybody? Any optimists? 9 months? No optimists? The whole room's full of people that saw my TED Talk. Okay, 14 months. The average age of an apple from a grocery store that gets the apple in your mouth. And that was awesome because they got you an apple every day and that's what people wanted. But that apple, by the time you get it, has no antioxidants left. They've all evaporated as free radicals. And it's basically just sugar and fiber. So the point is our system is much, much, much too centralized to deliver things like nutrition and flavor. And that's about to change. As Jane mentioned, this is a study from the USDA on what people would support or oppose in government policy related to food. All of these are pretty normal things that Americans argue about. Tax on sugared soda, calorie limits for school lunches. These are political topics, but not one of them that says mandatory labels on food containing DNA. 20% of the audience just laughed. I'll wait up for the translation, but mandatory labels on food containing DNA. Anything that was once alive contained DNA. So right next to Jane's organic labeling and non-GMO labeling will be contains DNA for 80% of them. So we just have to admit that we're basically ignorant, as a general population of what food is, where it comes from, and how to talk about it effectively going forward. So this is my next point. We need to make a whole lot more people that are smart as part of this next food revolution. And of course, biology by design. We're seeing this in fields, in the Media Lab, we have a group called Sculpting Evolution that's taken CRISPR, gene editing, to gene drive, which takes an edit into an offspring, and now spread the edit across chromosomes, so you can tell exactly when the edit leaves a population. If you're not following that conversation, that's the end of malaria, the end of Lyme disease, the end of a lot of horrible things with an ability to call back the edit out of the ecosystem. We now have the ability to do things like this at such scales that it can be scary, and it's 100% going to change the world in fundamental ways, the same way kind of digital life in the 60s and 70s has changed all of our lives today. And in the world of food, it's an all-out brawl. Amazon buys Whole Foods. Next day, Walmart kicks all their vendors off of AWS. Next day, Amazon says, we're going to have a meal delivery service, and next day, Blue Apron's stock price gets cut in half. This is like a moment in time that we will not see again. So this is a time to rethink retail, and everyone's doing it. And so I think what this is all leading to is a little bit of what Jane was talking about, the next revolution in ag. So she did an amazing job of laying out the story. And the simple story that I look for is the first revolution created societies. The second revolution integrated them all. The third one created cities, and this is what we're in today. That includes biotechnology, by the way, squarely in the third revolution. Question is, what's the fourth? And I think the fourth is a little bit weirder than you might guess. I think there's going to be a concept called climate democracy. And what I mean is, these are all the most beneficial climates in agriculture in blue, the least in red. We are slave to climate. we're going to stop being slave to climate. We're going to start designing genetically for climates, and we're also going to start producing climates. I think we'll see all of the technology for data applied to food in the same way that they thought this Willy Wonka, where they zap the candy bar and they send it through the air and they reconstitute it on the other side. I think we're going to create so much data that we're going to send data about food and how to grow it more than we'll start sending food or continue sending food. I'm the son of an agricultural family, and I don't do agriculture, or at least I didn't until I came to the Media Lab, the weirdest place on earth that let me do it. This is the case across the world. The next generation in agriculture is not there. The knowledge base is not there. It takes 60 years to become an effective farmer, of being in the field, seeing the plants, knowing what they need. And so there's a cry across the world right now. Who will be the next generation, and how will they act in the food system? So I'm going to go really fast now, unfortunately. Part of our project we call Record. This is record anything that we can about the way that plants produce things. This was our first lab 6 years ago. We produced enough food to feed about 300 people once a month. More importantly than the science at the time was the fact that we would make this pick-your-own lettuce patch for nerds. It was bright white roots, deep green colors, the first time anyone in the Media Lab ever ripped the roots off of anything. And so this inspired roboticists, data scientists, algorithms experts, all these people across Media Lab to think about what they could do in food. When we did this, we found out something very simple. Well, we thought it was crazy. The plants would taste different the next day, significantly different after harvest if we had some left over. Sweeter, much, much sweeter. So I thought my students were playing tricks on me. I put up cameras. I got angry, as one does about their work. Turns out I learned something very old. A plant under stress creates biochemical difference. That biochemical difference is flavor. And so then we designed this lab on the facade of the Media Lab maybe 4 years ago now. And if you know about the genome or genetics, I'm talking about the phenome or the phenomena that surrounds genetics. When someone says, oh, the tomato from Tuscany on the North Slope with the happy cow, they should say the set of genetics under the abiotic or biotic stress create this nutty flavor. So inside of here, we design climate to then produce gene expression of the things that we're looking for in food. We chart it all out into a recipe. So this blue line is a recipe, the zigzaggy line are sensors, but imagine that that's 1982 Napa, and we're trying to recreate from the past climate conditions the best Cabernet that ever existed. We can mine climate into the past. We do a lot with novel irrigation technologies. This is one that people seem to like, called aeroponics. I mean, it's all just water delivery, and at one side of the chain you have pray for rain, like I'm in a field praying for rain, and on the whole other side of the chain you had what NASA developed to send to space, which is aeroponics. No soil, no standing water, just mist of the macro-micronutrients and biologics you need for plants. This can use, they say, up to 90% less water, and I know that it can grow 3 to 5 times faster than you can in field. Then I started to wonder why I kept getting the same seeds all the time. In the United States, there's only 4 tomatoes that we eat commercially, 4 cultivars. So I went to the Heirloom and Ancient and Rare Seed Bank, and I requested these seeds that hadn't been grown in 150 years commercially. These tomatoes, they're supposed to be the best sauce tomatoes in the world, but they don't ship well. And so we brought them back to life. We have an entire genetic heritage that we have barely tapped because our only question for our genetics and food has been, do you ship well? Are you resistant to pests? Not, are you flavorful or are you good for me? We're going to go back through that catalog of life and start selecting new things to eat. I also do cotton. I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to go faster. Ask me about it later. It's crazy. My environments were getting really expensive and really big, and I didn't need big and expensive. I needed more climates. Imagine that I wanted to multiplex the problem. I wanted 100 climates in an array, single variable isolated across, because I wanted to compute things. So we invented what we call the personal food computer. I guess it's now 3 or 4 years ago. This version you could go to Amazon and a hardware store and put together. You had an Arduino and Raspberry Pi. You had an interface that was a game. We gave this to students. They had sensors, they had things they could change, and then they loaded a recipe that some other kid had grown when they loaded the plant digitally. Then they loaded the plant physically. It recreated the recipe again from the last kid that grew it. But then they get curious, and they'll say things like, well, CO2 is bad, right? Crank down CO2, plant dies because it can't breathe, kid learns a lesson about respiration of plants. but also just performed an experiment that none of us would ever do. Because we all think we know, the effects of CO2 deprivation on plants. But this is, when they download their recipe that they've created, they created a new derivative. They're mapping what those sets of genetics, whatever they chose to put in there, do under adverse conditions. This is 3 weeks growth in a food computer, so it's not boring. We had a teacher take our food computers, take climate data from 1950 and create the climate of the past in the classroom. Take current weather data and create the climate of the present, and take IBM Watson data and create the climate of the future. When you're trying to talk to a kid about climate change or environmental science, and you say the climate is changing, and they look up, and they're like, no, it's not. Or you have a climate in your classroom, 365 days a year, it's a lot more powerful. We released this one at the White House maybe, a year ago now. It's a little bit more complex. It breaks a lot. It's like a Cadillac version of our Ford truck that we had before, but it's getting better science now. We've taken the brain and ported it into microbes. So this is doing microbial growth for things like koji and kimchi and miso and all those things. We have a collaboration with some of the best restaurants in the world to record fermentations, to share the data about fermentations, and then email it to each other. This is my team. It's gotten a little bit too big, a little bit too weird and crazy, so we built a whole new lab. So this is my new lab at MIT. It's on the side of a former linear accelerator. We've scaled up our work to start bringing this into commercial production. We also started a new project recently we call the Tree Computer. This is with Ferrero Rocher. The Rocher is the candy. But the point is, we're going to grow things inside of this that no one has ever grown in control and fully understand. So it's a big new project. So that's record. Environment, sensors, cameras, every set of data, record. Next is decode. What do we do with that data? So we call this the open phenome. This is environmental data that we're collecting every 8 seconds or can be toggled. This can be built by a 12th grader, all the things that you see here. We collect mineral data using spectrophotometer. This is what people usually call terroir. They're like, oh, the terroir. Terroir is minerals, oxygen, biologics, carbon, a lot of other things. So this is the first step at it. So this runs all the time. Then we take the plants and we culture and sequence them. So we've created a big database now, at least for aquaculture. This was the first time that they'd ever done a root microbiome culture in aquaculture. So we did that, and that's all of the stuff that's kind of microbiologic running around the plant. We borrowed some technology from neuroscience, and so Ed Boyden's group at Media Lab developed this technique, expansion microscopy. This is the first plant meristem cell, the first root cell that anyone's ever seen using his technology. This will open up a whole new area of study in the field of agriculture, getting down to that cellular level. We collect data and images. So images are the future of agriculture, but they're not the current. Because we can take them, we can get all different kinds of images, spectrometer images, regular images, but we have nothing to correlate them against. So when you see all my other data sets, they're time-stamped in a series alongside the image, so that eventually we learn what that image means, and we don't have to do all of these other invasive tests. But right now, it's not ready for prime time. Spectrometer data, we do gas chromatography and mass spec. We take the plants, we find out what's in them. If you're looking at this and you're like, I don't want to eat a plant with hexanol, you just don't understand that hexanol is a flavor compound. These are the secondary metabolites that the plants are progressing. So all of this, from the what did we do it data to the what did we get data, is kind of part of our process. It's about 3.5 million data points per plant per grow. We call that a recipe, and we stick it into what we call our robots, the things I showed you before. We do machine learning on this. So what we've published recently is a first step at a white paper on the ability to use evolutionary algorithms to search our stress set to correlate it to our biochemical creation set. So we've been able to push, for example, a basil plant to produce more essential oil by targeting sets of attributes over time in intensity together. This has just never been possible before. This is wholly new science for ag. We then make simulations of that, and I have 30 seconds left, so I'm going to crank. This is the coolest project I think we have going. People see my work, and they're like, oh, vertical farms. That's cool. I saw that in Japan like 10 years ago. What's this guy talking about? So this is where we collect data on plants. We create new fundamental models for that biology, mathematical models, and then we run it on data from the real world. So what we did in this was collect weather data from the last 30 years using the EPW weather database, put it into our model, and then it created a Voronoi map of where the highest quality cotton would be grown. Now that's still total, it's not real yet, right? Because it's just what our model said of what real weather would do. Then we correlated it against FAO, that's collected data on cotton for the last 30 years. And the first time we ever tried this, we were 75% correlated. If I've totally lost you, this is the ability to predict in the future what genetics we would plant in what climate to get what value out of those genetics. You see the world in a whole different way. It's not inherit a climate, dominate a climate, it's use climate as catalog. Pair climate with genetics, and it's happening now. There's a bunch of startups in this space doing that, collecting data, siphoning it off, and then we're creating the complementary data set that goes along with the described field. So they're going to give me 5 more minutes. That's awesome. So you might be thinking I'm from outer space at this point, or that this would be useful in outer space. We do have a collaboration with NASA. NASA's been doing these experiments for the last 20 years. We're now working on something called the Deep Space Gateway, and what we would send to deep space as, SpaceX and Blue Origin get on their way. But of course, this crowd specifically knows all about this, all of the vertical farms or plant factories that you have in Japan. You may not have seen these. These look very similar, but this is a tobacco plant with a tobacco mosaic virus that produces an Ebola-resistant protein that creates a vaccine. So it's not just lettuce, it's pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, cosmetics, all the way on down. But this is reality, and this is something that no one talks about. For the last 5 years, we've seen major bankruptcies in the space every year. Everybody's dumping money into this. Silicon Valley is creating a huge hype bubble, and it's all around people that protect their technology. And so they're saying better food for the world, but what I mean is better lettuce for the world that creates new nutrition, because lettuce isn't nutritious, and it's totally black boxed, and I'm not going to tell you how it works, because that's where I find my value. We have to explode that, because this is failing for the reason that no one shares anything, and it's a complex, self-adaptive system. The most hard to understand systems on Earth is putting life in a box. So this is the last part of the presentation, and I think I can do it in 3 minutes, so thank you. This is where I take all the technology and put it out in the world. I'm a scientist, and I have research contracts that are about science. But we've made the decision to take all of our work with the support of Media Lab, with the support of the University of MIT, to make it all open source. And so right now, we don't have anybody funding the community, but the community just exists off of the tools that we put into it. So you might ask, what do we put into it? You can go to our website and find all this stuff. Literally, build videos, Amazon shopping carts, tutorials, everything out on Wikipedia, how to build it. It's not the best guide in the world, and it's still a project in evolution, but it's a beginning. And so just by putting these things out, a new interface with Scratch, and so now instead of that kind of 2D interface, or the 3D one, we have a much more simple one that at the same time teaches coding, but also teaches what we call climate creation, which is the ability. So I thought this would be for kids. Then I found out all these people like at major ag universities in the United States were using it, because plant scientists don't know command line. But plant scientists have amazing ideas of what they could do if they knew command line. And so this is now allowing them and others to get into it. We started this little Reddit-style forum maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. It's Wild West. This is what my inbox used to look like. People from all over the world asking me things from a range from proto-wiring shield schematic to what should I grow in my classroom to a million other things. So this is not just for experts. It's students, scientists, makers, hackers, all these people answering and asking their own questions with each other as a community, because they now have a device that makes them common, that allows them to transmit their ideas and share them with each other. We hold these big camps, and there's others now. This one was with National Geographic. We call it Build Your Own Food Computer. They came in, they built these in 2 days. Then they took them home across the United States, and then they started clubs. And what do you think they called themselves? The Homebrew Food Computer Clubs, right? Like, these are weirdos doing weird things that people don't understand that are going to impact the world as significantly as the folks doing homebrew computers in their closets, in their basements 30, 40 years ago. This is the next generation, and you're seeing the bio-digital convergence, and these are the pioneers on the front lines. So I get these videos sent to me all the time. I don't know these kids. I've never talked to these kids. I wish I had the time or the money to support them, but I don't. But they're building anyway on not great instructions, but okay instructions, finding the passion, finding the motivation. You can teach chemistry in this. You can teach biology. You can teach coding. You can teach data science. You can teach literature. We had a teacher teach literature with this. It was amazing. They just need a platform. And so I'll close down in the next 30 seconds. We've deployed in a refugee camp in Amman with the World Food Program. Amazing thing happened. We put the technology out, typical, kind of mentality of maybe they'll grow tomatoes or maybe they'll grow things that they could eat. You give a person power in their situation and they come up with a solution. What we found they grew, St. John's wort. We never would have thought of that, but St. John's wort is a depression alleviant, and the camps are rife with depression. And so this person had a PhD in St. John's wort, or a Syrian refugee, was able to take his knowledge, put it on a platform, address a local problem, and make a profit. And it wasn't because we told him to do it. It was simply because we gave him a tool that allowed him to do it.
Building the food computer was an incredible experience. I worked in almost all the buildings.
This is Pau from Brazil.
And I learned many things.
He made this video on his own.
And between sensors and actuators. I worked with wires, relays, and the voltmeter. I installed
It's a 12-year-old.
for measuring water and air temperature, light intensity, CO2, pH, and so much more. Wiring the Mega Proto Shield, now that was tough. My dad did all the soldering. We even had a little burning due to a short circuit. I installed the LED panels and webcam. I had my first
Okay,
experience
so you get the point.
and had lots
This is not just a rock star in the community. There are a bunch of videos like this, and I'm way over time, so I'm going to conclude. This is the world, if you don't know it, of food. Any country with a red color, that's baseline, is considered food insecure. Any country that is red with a purple overlay is both food insecure and producing food for another country. So that's Mexico for the United States, that's Africa for the Middle East, and of course that's Brazil for China. Overlaid against that is the Industrial Revolution. So those are all the supply chains on top of it. So this is our fragile world of food right now. This is our global farm. And this is the difference. We're going to clear a lot of that and start doing this, which is those points are cities. We're going to start sending information about food to other places across the world. And this isn't just an imaginative thing. In the last year, we've had people build our technology in 50 countries. It's a motley crew. They're hackers. We're not quite organized yet. We're doing our best to support it, but we paid no one any money to do this. They did it because they wanted to, and they finally found a device that could carry their voice forward of what they think the future of food should be. Last statement. The future of food is not arguing about what's wrong with this. It's not about camping off and making a position, GMO, anti-GMO, this, that, the other. The future of food is about creating open information, networking it with passionate individuals so that they can ask and answer their own question of what if. Thank you.